Good morning once again with Dave Knudson.
Good morning.
Crosswalk Counseling, and just talking about this conversation. We're going to talk about just like how do you set your expectations right? What do you fall back on in a sense, as far as the things that are going to be solid, that can be you can really help you to set your expectations, your identity, who you are in Christ. Just the things of this world. How do you set your expectations properly? And I know for myself, there's two key areas I think I fall back on. I kind of go back to set my expectations properly. One is kind of the sovereignty of God. It's kind of a big theological idea, but right, that God is in control. I know we've talked a little bit about how that also means God's in charge. Like he's the one that has to tell me what to do. The other one that kind of hits me a lot of times is just the reward or the goal. What am I hoping is going to be accomplished through this? And frankly, for me, sometimes it's hard to see, right? Like, what's the point of all this? Sometimes you listen to or see things, and it's like, well, this is a totally bad idea to lock everything down. So we're just pointlessly sitting at home. And you have the other side that's kind of like, oh, we have to stay at home. We have to do this, because keep everyone safe. And you're like, but it's how good is that, and what so how much reward is there? It just seems pointless just to be staying at home day after day after day, and you have to remind yourself there is a point to it. But yeah, so how do you deal with it yourself? Like, what kind of verses do you use, or what kind of how do you help yourself process these things in regards to maybe God's sovereignty, or how do you go about doing that for yourself?
Well, my one thing that I've seen is I have certain expectations in my life, and I'm getting close to retirement, and I, had plans even this year to start working towards that, and in God's infinite wisdom and His sovereignty, that may change, it may push it back or whatever, and I've had to go through these things in my own heart and just, what kinds of things am I hoping in? In regards to it, and if I'm hoping in my 401k and my retirement stuff to be a certain way, and that's when I'm going to be satisfied and whatnot, I'm missing the point.
Okay. And
there's things that I've had to definitely look at in my own life and heart of what does God desire to do through this time that's going to be much more in line with what his desires are. And for me, it's looking outside of myself. One of the verses that's been key for me is in Philippians 2, 3 and 4, do nothing from
selfish ambition or conceit, but in everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, you're not even getting it right. See, we haven't memorized them, we can't.
Yeah.
Do nothing from selfish empty conceit, but with humility of mind, let each of you regard one another as more important than yourself.
Right.
And the thing that I see in myself is that a lot of my thinking at times, and is revealed, especially in this kind of situation, is my own selfishness, and what is it doing to me, and how is it making me uncomfortable, and how is it impacting me, and like right now we're doing some remodeling in our house, and we only have half of our house right now, and Ben is back at home. Nothing wrong with Ben being there, but it's not what we had before, and it's kind of for a while it's nice, and you're doing things together, and you may be playing games and whatnot. But I've heard this from other people too. The first couple of weeks have been nice, but let's move on. We want to get back to our normal,
right?
Whatever they think normal is.
Yeah. But
that's their hope, and yet God, and me personally too, wants me to be being able to, regardless of what happens here, to be able to function the way He wants me to. And in my case, is to think outside myself, and to think of others, and to care for others, and to love others, and to point people to God in the midst of this, and what and helping people to see things correctly,
right?
So that this time is not wasted,
right?
Because this is in one day, and the rest of our lives.
Yeah.
He wants to use today.
Yeah.
He doesn't want us to wait until everything's back to normal.
Right.
Me included, because
right.
if I'm thinking the other way, I'm not near as able to be an instrument of His.
Right.
Because it's my sin, my wrong thinking,
right,
getting in the way of that.
Yeah. So in some senses, my approach, right, is to think in terms of like, okay, God is sovereign, so He's actually in control of the situation and allowing this to happen for a good purpose. That's the authority side. It's for a good purpose in your life. And so you're a business owner. You're concerned about your business. You're concerned about not just your business, but your employees. So it's in a sense, it's taking your focus off of, okay, how's my business doing, to how am I going to care for my employees in the midst of this? How am I going to help all of us to trust God better, to walk with God better in the midst of the situation? And that's a really good perspective, I think, because we can get caught up on the irritations of the moment and lose sight of, if God's in control, what does He want me to do? And so are there particular ways you go about kind of helping yourself stay there, or is
I got to admit, there's a lot of learning that needs to go on there yet, because you cannot rest on your laurels. You may see some progress and some victory, so to speak, in things, but if you don't continue to put yourself in the solid foundation of God's truth, especially knowing areas that you're weak in. I mean, that's part of it. We know things we have a tendency to fall in. And it's those that you really need to have some solid scriptures that you memorized and continually go back to, and that you can stand on over time. It's one of those things that I cannot go into this cavalier way.
Right.
I just can't.
Right. In some senses, it's like pursuing a relationship, right? Where you're saying, okay, I've got to take the relationship with God seriously here. If He's actually getting my attention here, and if I'm just thinking, oh, I've just got to get through here, it's like I'm ignoring this waving hand from God, like, hey, let's talk, let's go through this, and I'm going like, no, God, give me 2 weeks, give me a year, give me a month, until I feel like I'm normal, so I can talk to you. But that's not the way it works in a relationship.
No, and honestly, I also it helps me to be thankful for the way that God has made me, even with my emotions and things that sometimes embarrasses me with other people, or it makes me think, oh man, people don't look at me very well because I'm responding this way or whatnot. But to truly, when I'm thinking correctly, is to be thankful that He's made me that way, because it's opening up my eyes to things that He wants to channel those emotions in the proper way. Does that make sense?
It does. So, like, you bring up a great point, because it's like we're all different in the process of handling this, and that's okay. That's actually good. It helps all of us to see maybe different aspects of this and how God might be working in the midst of it. What are some of the? I mean, you can't go into specifics, right? But what are some of the situations you've seen where people are responding and how they're dealing with it? I know for me, I've seen, some people, like you say, cavalier, just like they're just impatient, I think, you know what I mean? Because they're seeing the situation, seeing it doesn't have to be really this way. Ideally speaking, it could be better. And so they're impatient in some aspect about the scenario. I don't know, what have you seen in the process of talking to people?
Yeah, there's been a number of different things, and some have been very, taking the pandemic really seriously, and they can see me just from a distance, and they already have their mask on, and they don't want to get anywhere close to you, and you can just see that they're just very, very fearful of getting sick.
Right.
And that's an emotion, and I respect that. The concern I'd have is if that's their total focus and they're not putting it where God would want to. But the other side of the coin is the cavalier and the things that concerns me too. And when I'll come up to somebody and they're ready to shake my hand and just acting like there's nothing going on at all, and I don't think that's proper perspective either. I think that there's fear in both sides of that.
So you think fear is actually driving both responses?
Absolutely.
So one side's letting fear, can in a sense control how they protect themselves, and one side's letting fear drive. In a sense, I'm going to conquer the fear. I'm just going to, I can't. I'm going to. How's the cavalier side being fearful? Do you think?
Well, it's basically. Yeah, go ahead.
No. Fearful as might be the wrong term. But just driven by fear or controlled by fear in some fashion.
Yeah, I mean, because fear is something that I mean, God would desire for us to. I'm talking about people who may not be believers in some cases respond to this, but say that they're believers.
Yeah.
And God would want us to channel our fear towards fearing Him. And what does it really mean to fear Him?
Yeah.
And to have and it's going back to that whole thing of authority and His sovereignty and trusting His wisdom and things and whatnot. It's not the fear of Him and not being wanted to come close to Him because we fear Him walking on eggshells. I mean, we have free access to Him.
Right.
But it's more having a proper respect for Him.
Yeah.
And what He's doing in all the process here.
So actually what you're saying, it seems like you're saying then that the fear is actually fear of not being, quote unquote, acting normal. So I'm going to act almost cavalier in this situation because I'm afraid of acting any other way than normal in the situation, and that's actually controlling me.
Yes.
That's interesting.
It's and it's a subtle thing.
Yeah,
and people don't even necessarily realize it.
Right.
The root situation.
Right. I can see that in my own life where I don't want to act like anything's wrong, and so I'm going to act this way because I'm afraid of acknowledging. And in some way, you're saying I'm afraid of acknowledging. No, this is not a normal situation, and you can't act like it's normal.
Right. Yeah, and that's why things can come out just to put the blame game on.
Yeah, that's true.
Other people too. To say, well, is all this true or isn't it true? Or I think that there's a lot of conspiracy going on. I've heard that too. And people rationalize it that way, and they find a way to settle and put their hope in that.
Right, finding someone to blame for what's going on.
Now again, if it was a believer, that's obviously not where the stance is. It doesn't mean that we can't think about those things.
Yeah.
And reason God gave us minds for purpose that way, but that shouldn't be our primary.
Yeah, that's a great point. So whether you're acting out of fear or you're blaming people or you're in all sense cavalier, it's in some ways it can be all fear driven.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah, it's good reminder. So how do we balance that? Because obviously fear, like we said, is a natural emotion in what's going on. It's actually a wise emotion overall in the situation. You should be afraid of some things. How do we sync that up with a fear of God in the midst of it? I'm thinking of, for me, it seems like what helps me is, well, what's my reward? Or what does God want me to do in the situation so that I'm honoring God, that I'm following God? Does that make sense? Because I think giving ourselves a direction in the midst of fear is probably important.
Sure. And there's a lot of different avenues. That's certainly one of them.
Okay.
And sometimes it just depends on the person and what's really going on, because it's, none of us are exactly alike. If I go into a counseling session and I hear them say, things that they're veering towards depression, say, or something like that. Oh, I know exactly what they need. Boom, 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 boom.
Yeah.
I'm in trouble when I do that.
Yeah.
Each person is unique.
Yeah.
And there's different things that are intertwined in the process, and I cannot go that direction. So I don't think there's a cookie cutter mold. I mean, I can appreciate what you're saying. I think that's one of the things.
Yeah.
And it might just be too that they may not be seeing some avenues of Christ and what He has done properly.
Okay.
I mean, just the gospel.
Yeah.
I mean, I know that sounds kind of strange because the gospel is simple enough for a child to understand, but it's profound enough as well.
Yeah.
There's just different things that we get off as believers, me included, on the gospel that need to get corrected to be able to think correctly.
Yeah.
And so, sometimes it's just, it might be forgiveness. It might not really recognizing the forgiveness of Christ correctly. It may be something on, just our not being able to trust Him with something because we're trusting in ourselves, or it may be something about His attributes, God's attributes, that we need to focus on more, that are keeping us from really connecting the way we ought to. So I mean, it just depends, and that's why, as far as the skill set that God has allowed me to have, is is the probing questions, and it makes people uncomfortable.
Yeah.
At times, but those questions are critical.
Yeah.
To really see what avenue is necessary there. So it depends. I mean, it could very well be what you're talking about,
Right.
but it's not completely. You can't really just put anybody in one given category.
Right. No, that's a good point. That's a good point. So, like for me, I am in a sense motivated by reward or goal accomplishment in that sense in various ways, and I think what wisely, I think, so I'm trying to think through wisely. Okay, how do I set the right goals?
Yeah.
Because it's hard to set goals in the current environment, right? Because there's so much uncertainty. You really don't know what's going on.
Right.
And what God's in a sense reminded me is set your goal on knowing me better. Set your goal on. I mean, I think of it in terms of like, okay, I could set a goal on knowing as much about COVID as I possibly could, right? You know, like, okay, I'm gonna do all the research, I'm gonna find all the articles, but ultimately, what's the reward of that? Okay, I know a bunch of stuff, but am I really that helpful, especially in the current environment? Because there's so much uncertain, so much we don't know. Or maybe my goal is just to protect my family. Again, it's a worthy goal, but I struggle, but then is God's goal for me to protect my family, and that kind of comes back to what you said somewhat earlier about, okay, my goal is not just to be concerned about myself. My goal is to think about others, think about the gospel, to know what God's doing in my life better.
Yeah, and that's for me certainly. I mean, because that's the thing that I'm more of an introvert, and it's easy for me to just want to, again, get comfortable in my confines there, and I can study the Word of God all day or whatever, But that's not necessarily what God has in mind for me either.
Right.
And for me, that's what I need to be pushed in.
Yes.
But I do see, one of the things that I have learned a little bit from the ACBC stuff is, the old song, "Trust and obey, for there's no other way to be happy in Jesus." You know that. There's things that we know we need to obey in, especially in times of uncertainty. Yeah. When we just, everything, there's the new normal here, so to speak. And we don't know, we can't do the things that we're used to doing or whatever. Yeah. Well, there's certain things that God certainly has made clear that we need to obey Him in. Yeah. However that looks in your situation, like I said, it's not just doing all these things or whatever, but we know what those
wisely
things
picking the things that you think God wants you to do.
Yeah, and we know that there's certain things. Maybe it'll be just I need to spend more time with my kids, and I need to be playing interactive games with them or whatever because I have time now to do that, and I'm being selfish, and I know I'm just wanting to do my thing. Yeah. Whatever it is.
Yeah, my wife and I were joking this morning that my natural goal would be to sit in a corner, read books, and eat chocolate.
Yeah. Well, if I had a little ice cream, it'd be okay too. But.
So the result of the reward of this time period would be well read and fat.
Yeah, there you go.
And so we've been exercising, we've been spending time with family, but those are good ways that I should embrace that God has given to me to be better connected with Him through my family, through my wife, and not just be thinking about myself so much.
Yeah, and then the other avenue is the trusting.
Yeah.
And that's where we've talked about earlier as far as the things that are exposed and our expectations and whatnot, and that we need to learn to trust Him. And if there's certain things that we're not trusting Him in, there's probably something that's not right in our thinking about it.
Right. Yeah, because what's encouraged me through this time, and I've seen it in our church too, is people think about the eternal gospel implications of this. Hey, I've got a chance to better know my neighbor. I've got to get a chance to better love my neighbor during this time. And I've just been so encouraged by just little stories here and there of people that are seeing God working in someone's heart and loving them, encouraging them. That's been cool to see, because I think if I go back to Job, right? Job had to wrestle with God. He lost everything, and then he had to wrestle with Job. But what was the reward he had for wrestling with God and not blaming people, not acting out of fear, but just wrestling with God? Was he actually got to talk with God in person, and to see God bless him ultimately at the end, and so that's the reward I want, I guess, for myself when I look at it. When I'm not just thinking about out of fear, but really saying, okay, what reward do I want? That's what motivates me, and it helps me.
Yeah, and I think all in all, everybody would desire that.
Yeah.
Just that other things get in the way of it. Because
Yes.
I know we were talking before this, as far as Job is concerned, is that I really truly believe that even though he ended up having family again and had even more material possessions and all these things,
Right.
I don't think that was what really satisfied him
Right.
at the end. He
Yes.
saw God in a more
Yes.
greater,
personal, all the
exactly.
ways that go with
Absolutely.
it. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so he came out better for it.
Right. And it's been a process, right? But I feel like that in my own life where I've like, okay, I mean, that's where the journaling's definitely helped me to notice, okay, that God's moving in my life in certain ways. I've noted, the chance to have a better relationship with my wife and kids through this is God saying, let's reprioritize a few things. But in the process, I get to know Him. I get to know His mercy in my life. I get to know His faithfulness in my life. I get to see His sovereignty right through this. That He knows what's best and not me, and that's actually a really good lesson to learn over time. Is that my expectations of what I think God should be doing and what God's expectations for what He should be doing are two different things.
Oh,
and it's good for me to realize that.
His ways are not like our ways, and His thoughts aren't like our thoughts.
Yes, right. Yeah. So that's what God's been doing in my life.
Absolutely.
So how do you, on the counseling side of things, how do you help people to maybe approach that and think through that for themselves? Are there things verses you use or places you go to help them with that?
Well, yeah, if it's things that they need to be channeled in thinking as far as God is concerned, obviously we're talking about believers here.
Yeah.
If they're not a believer, of course, then you're spending more time just on the gospel, and giving them little tidbits, but going back to the foundation, because if they don't have that foundation, they're in trouble.
Right.
They can't think correctly.
Right. They won't even know God is for them without the gospel.
Right.
Yeah.
But certainly, if it's things about just a relationship that they have, and remembering all that they have in Christ. Ephesians 1-3 is some passages that we use quite a bit in regard to that. If it's something that they just need to be recognizing more, and we're still probing on some heart issues, Matthew 5-7, which I know you've been teaching on a lot, is a good starting point a lot of times for them as well.
That's right.
If it's something that you see in the area of pride or whatever, usually it's like Philippians 2. And recognizing here Christ having everything sitting at the right hand of God, chose to come down in the form of a man and go through all these experiences for us, and to recognize that, and if that, so we hit that as well. James, a lot of things in James, if they're struggling with not, uncertainty or whatnot, it might be James 1 with, asking God, if anybody lacks wisdom, let him ask God. Give it to all men freely without reproach.
Right.
If
you
ask it, if you trust me, if you truly trust me, and you're not wavering and going back to
double-minded man,
double-minded man type of thing.
Yeah.
So there's things like that, and then Romans 8 is a solid foundational thing. A lot of times, if people need to recognize that there's a battle between the flesh and the spirit.
Yeah.
And Paul mentioned that in Romans 7. And even here, Romans was written one of the latter parts of his life.
Yes.
And here, we think of Paul being this,
super spiritual guy,
super godly guy, you know, and yet he said, hey, I can struggle with these very same things too, and we have to recognize that the flesh is there, and we need to, see the value of the spirit and conquering those kinds of things and not taking the flesh lightly.
Yes.
In regard to, so there's different, depending on the situation, there's different passages that we can go to. Now, like even, for example, 2 Corinthians 5:10, where it talks about taking every thought captive to the obedience of Christ.
Right.
And there's things in regards to that as well, that if your thinking isn't correct, it's going to impact your emotions, which is going to impact your actions.
Yeah.
And so, whatever we're thinking about is going to come out in behaviors.
Yes.
out there. So I mean, so it just depends on what comes out in the conversations and the probing. But
Yeah.
that gives you a little taste anyway. There's a lot of different avenues, but it's really using the scriptures to key in intentionally where a person's at.
Yeah.
I mean, and I know everybody that hears this can experience this as they're having devotions, and with God, and sometimes you can read through the scriptures in entirety, and you go back and you hit something that, man, I didn't see this before.
Mm-hmm.
But it happens to be something that's hitting you right now that God is working on your heart in, and of course it's going to impact you more there. But that's kind of what we do, is trying to help people to see what's really going on right now, so you can use the scriptures the way God would desire.
Yeah, that's awesome. So again, thanks for being with us. Hope you enjoyed this conversation. And again, if you, we all at times